guys, welcome back to the channel. So we're back on top of my parking garage, a little bit different of an angle, and the car is super dirty. But I got a topic for you guys that I'm pretty excited to talk about because it just gives me a chance to yap about what I think is the peak Mustang generation. So I guess just to kick it off, let me tell you guys about which Mustang generations I think are not peak. You know, first thought in my mind was, is the first generation the peak Mustang? I guess it kind of is, but they're not really all that big these days. I mean, certainly within like niche groups they are, but like if you're looking to like make big power, have a modern car, all the drivability, and be within a reasonable budget, you're probably not really looking at a first gen Mustang. So there's a second gen. That's not it. The Mustang 2 will never be peak Mustang. That's worse Mustang. There's the third gen Foxbodies, and those are really cool. I don't think they're peak Mustang. I think the problem with those ones is they've kind of lost some of their modernity here in 2025. They were, a lot of them were barely coughing up over 200 horsepower. And they're really cool cars. They're super nostalgic, but I think the Fox body Mustangs just aren't good enough, especially when you start comparing them to modern Mustangs by today's standards to be peak Mustang. So there's the fourth gen, which now we get into SN95 territory, New Edge stuff. I think these Mustangs are pretty cool. They definitely have like a very special heritage to them, especially when you're talking about the 03, 04 Terminator Cobras. That was really the first time that these Mustangs, ever since the first generation, that these Mustangs made like, or could make huge power. Like, you know, with the 03, 04 Terminator Cobras, on those 2-valve engines, the first time that you were back to, with modifications and with supercharger and stuff, you could make a pretty reliable 600 plus wheel horsepower with those cars. And do it, like I said, do it reliably, do it well, not have reliability issues. But their initial start off of those cars, they only really got good until the last 2 years. The 4.6 2-valves and even the 5.0 push rod engines that they first came out with, I think the first 1 or 2 years that the New Edge Mustangs came out, they were so anemic in power that they're just not good enough to be peak Mustang. So, because what I'm looking for when I'm thinking about like peak Mustang is its entire model year range over its generation. So then we get to the S197s. And now I think with the S197s, we are finally getting into a solid contender for what would be the peak Mustang generation. This is the generation that Coyote came out, and Coyote is definitely peak Mustang engine. I'll argue that all day long. And then, of course, you had the brilliant 1314 GT500s with the 5.8 Trinity engines that are making like 662 horsepower. Those cars were sick. Now, also too, there's the Boss 302, amazing cars with the Roadrunner engines, and those are Coyote-based engines, you know, all Coyote architecture, that you could go make big wheel horsepower numbers with and not really worry about breaking the rods like you would in a Generation 1 Coyote. Now, the problem to me with the S197s is the original 4.6 3-valve V8s that were in, that were from 2005 to 2010. These engines were so crappy, and Ford, I don't think, really cared about making like a really phenomenal V8 like they did with the Coyote, because they didn't really have competition. The Camaro wasn't back, the Challenger wasn't back. I think the Charger was just starting up again when they replaced the Intrepid. And they didn't really have any meaningful competition, so they could kind of just like throw a lackluster V8, call it a day. Now, I will say with those 4.6s, they are one of the best sounding V8s I've ever heard. I think they sound better than Coyote engines for sure. I don't know what it is about those 3-valves, but they really do just sound so good. But because of those 4.6s, that's why I think they plagued the S197 for too long for the S197 to really be peak Mustang. Even though I think the 1314 model year of the Mustang, whether it's a GT or the GT500, is one of the best Mustangs you can get. Obviously, you're sacrificing some things, you know, especially with like not having an IRS, independent rear suspension. There's some technology lag in there, but I think the two biggest issues with those engines is that when you compare them with the S550s, when the Gen 2 Coyotes came around, they weren't incredibly strong. So they certainly were much more stout engines than in the past for the Mustangs, obviously with the exception of like the 0304 Terminator Cobras. But the problem was those 5.8s, they could do 700 wheel just fine. Anything above that, you're risking your connecting rods. And that was kind of the same story with the Generation 1 Coyote. You could do, 700 horsepower, although even 700 horsepower, you're kind of living on a prayer right there. But you could do it, but you're getting pretty risky. And then we go to the last of contenders that I don't think is peak Mustang, but the S650s. These are really cool cars, but they are absolutely not without their faults. So the big issue with this, and this may not be a super fair category to use against why I don't think the S650 Mustangs are peak Mustang generation, but I think with the S650s, they just don't sell. Like, they really are such a sales flop. And I remember when these numbers first kind of started coming around with the 2024s and the 2025s, just seeing such flat sales numbers, like the take rates for these cars was just so poor. People were saying, well, it's because you can't tune them, or they were saying things like it's like ugly, or there's a design issues with them, or it's not enough of a design change. I don't really think any of those are true, and especially now that you can tune these cars, and you can go look at the quarter or the past 2 quarters since these cars did become tunable. They're still sales flops. They still just don't sell well at all. The biggest issue with these cars is they are too expensive. They are just far, far too expensive for what they are. There's certainly good reasons to have complaints about these S650s, but I think Ford has just kind of lost, I don't know, I feel like they've just kind of lost sight of what the Mustang should be. The GTs aren't like insanely overpriced, but I genuinely think that's why they just don't sell very well. They're just simply too expensive of a car. If these cars, if you could go get like a well-optioned GT, like a well-optioned GT Premium, and they're in the 40s, low 40s, I mean, I think they would sell like crazy. Just because it's the next generation Mustang. I mean, people just enjoy that. I certainly do. It's just the price that's such a scare factor. With these cars, they just simply are too expensive. So the other issue, and I'm not saying that this is permanent right now, 3 model years into the 650 generation of Mustang, but and again, this could change, but don't tell people I'm saying this for you guys listening out there. I think the S650 and everything they've done, every one-off car, all the different variations of them, all the different models, I think they're boring. I think they're just too boring. So what most people do, and this is, and I think it's valid. I mean, I've done it with here, put a Whipple on the Coyote. What most people do with these cars is they buy a GT and then throw a Whipple at them. Maybe I shouldn't say most people, but certainly a plurality of people just looking to make really big horsepower numbers for a pretty decent price. They go buy their S650 Mustang and they throw a Whipple at it. So a lot of these GTs you see, there's a pretty high collection out there of S650 Mustangs that are just a Coyote with a Whipple. Then if you venture out and go get an RTR Spec 3, it's a Coyote with a Whipple. Maybe you want an RTR Spec 5, it's a Coyote with a Whipple. Or a Spec 2, well, it's a Coyote and you can option a Whipple. And then if you don't want to go with the RTR route, you can go with the Shelby American route. So you get the Shelby American Super Snake, that's a Coyote with a Whipple. Or you can do the Shelby American GT350, that's also a Coyote with a Whipple, and not really a GT350. But that's not Ford's fault, and that's kind of a separate topic. And then you have the Mustang GTD, which is a Coyote with a Eaton TVS. Different, but not really. And there have been photographs taken at the Nürburgring with a test mule GTD with new aero bits that are with new aerodynamic parts that have been placed on it, and also photographs showing that it's a Whipple. So GTD looks like it's going to be another Coyote with a Whipple. Yes, I know it's a Predator, but the Predator is a Coyote architecture-based engine. So all the cars out there that you can buy of any variant spin-off of a V8 Mustang, they're all Coyotes with a Whipple. And to be honest, that's pretty boring. Oh, by the way, guys, welcome to the channel. This is Rev Theory Productions. Here we showcase a coyote with a Whipple, but it's not boring over here. But anyways, enough of that joke. I think that's just the problem with them. There's not really a whole lot of interesting things, and a coyote with a Whipple is brilliant. They really are fantastic, and there's great reasons to do it and why everybody is doing it in their one-off Mustangs. But it's kind of boring. It's not super interesting. We've seen it 8 million times, and it's certainly cool, I guess. It's certainly cool, and maybe it sounds weird as I'm sitting on a car that's a coyote with a Whipple for an S650 Mustang, as I'm kind of trash talking them. Not that I really want trash. I think the GTD and the Shelby American GT350s and Super Snakes are certainly respectable cars, but they're just kind of boring. They're just kind of boring. I haven't really heard that opinion from anybody, but like every time you look for like an upgraded Mustang, it's all just coyotes with a Whipple. So I think that's the big problem with the S650 right now, is they're just not that interesting. Along with, again, the price. The GTs are too expensive, and they're just kind of like a weird thing out there where I don't know why different, one-off manufacturers think that there's such a high desire for super, super expensive Mustangs. So the GT350 from Shelby American, last time I looked, it was like $130,000. The Super Snake's like $220,000. The GTD is $330,000 plus, and you have to do a YouTube video interview and try to so you can actually get accepted to be able to purchase the car. So I don't know when Ford turned into Porsche or Ferrari, but like whatever, I guess. So anytime you have a Mustang that's 6 digits for a price tag and starts with a 1, 2, or 3, I think you've gone a bit astray, because they're cool cars and they're certainly interesting to see and look at like car shows or whatever, but they don't like really exist, not meaningfully. They're not something that people are going to really want to obtain. And you have to be like a super crazy diehard enthusiast to go spend that kind of money on a Mustang. The thing is, for me, if I was going to go spend that kind of money on a car, I am done looking at Mustangs. We're definitely into probably some European territory, and I'd definitely start flirting with the Corvette 01 or 01X, but that's kind of another topic. But those, for me, are the reasons why the S650 is not peak Mustang, or at least it is not yet. It's too expensive and not quite interesting enough yet. Okay, so that leaves us with the S550. This is a generation, to me, I think is absolutely peak Mustang. So I know people who are kind of looking at getting into the performance Mustang category are probably not really looking at the 2.3 liter or the 3.7 liter. Those were the first options when the S550 came out in the 2015 model year. I'll gloss over them real briefly. So the 3.7 Cyclone engine was certainly a really big improvement from the 4 liter that came from the S197. Now I know they did use a 3.7 in the later model S197s, so not totally fair to them in terms of comparing it with the S550. But the V6 offering in the S550 is actually a pretty decent engine. They were 300 horsepower plus. I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but they were above 300 horsepower, which is a perfectly solid and respectable number for a V6. And they were just like, they're relatively reliable, relatively decent, good on gas. Now I know nowadays a 6-cylinder is not the essence of a Mustang, and I get it. The first 64.5 model year Mustang was an inline 6-cylinder, but by today's standards in 2025, a 6-cylinder is just not really the essence of a Mustang. And then you have the 2.3 liter. I guess there have been some issues. I haven't really ever looked into these cars, because anytime I'm looking at Mustang, it's always a V8 based engine. But the 2.3 liter, I think they pulled from the RS or the ST Focus. They're pretty decent from what I've heard. They're relatively stout. They make decent power. They do okay. Gas mileage is certainly really great. So I get it. You're also going to save on insurance. So I kind of get it, but it's a decent offering for people who are not looking for a V8 Mustang. But it's kind of the first time, well, besides, again, the later model S197s, so I shouldn't say first time, but one of the first times that every engine offering in a Mustang was pretty decent. Obviously with the Gen 2 Coyote, I'll talk about here in just a second, but obviously that being a great engine. But the 4-cylinder and the 6-cylinder, pretty decent engines, like all things considered, for a Mustang that you're buying off the showroom floor. So, okay, onto the Coyote. So the Generation 2 that came out in 2015, this was the first time that Coyote got really good in the production line GT models. So a lot of the parts and materials of the Coyote were pulled from the Roadrunner engine from the Generation 1 Coyote. And the Roadrunner engine was a very stout engine. But in the Gen 2 Coyote, you like, no matter which Mustang GT, GT Premium, whichever package you got a very, very stout Generation 2 Coyote. And these were the first time that you could go get a Coyote and easily throw over 700 wheel horsepower at it, obviously with boost, but you could very reliably do over 700 wheel horsepower. Some people would push them even up to, 4-digit horsepower numbers or beyond, and they would get away with it for a while. Now, obviously, when you're at 1,000 horsepower on a stock bottom end Coyote, it gets a little scary, a little nerve-wracking. There's probably some anxiety about a really big bank account charge of rebuilding your engine that you're going to have to do pretty soon. But definitely a significant improvement over the Generation 1. You had a stronger crankshaft, you had stronger rods, and it just took to boost so much better than the Generation 1. Not that the Generation 1 did bad with boost, but it just started getting kind of sketchy. It's super easy to get over 650, 700 wheel horsepower when you throw a supercharger or turbos at a Mustang. And as soon as you do that, you're kind of into some scary territory with the rods blowing on the Generation 1 Coyotes. So the Generation 2 Coyote, fantastic engine. Then you had the Generation 3, which was an even better improvement. Now, there are kind of some caveats with that. I know there are people that prefer a Generation 2 Coyote over a Generation 3 for boosted applications. They have a little bit lower of a compression ratio, and you don't have to deal with the direct injection. They're just port injected. So I do get that, but even still, the Generation 3, amazing with boost, amazing NA. This is the first time you could simply just run E85 on a Coyote simply with the tune. You wouldn't have to upgrade absolutely anything. You just simply tune it and you are E85 ready. The fuel detection sensors would dynamically sense ethanol and octane levels, and it would adjust. You could flex fuel it. It was just really cool to see that you could finally just throw E85 at a car and not ever have any issues with it. So yeah, so you had the Generation 3 Coyote, which was just such a great engine, and to me, I think just like a full-on improvement over the Generation 2. And then we get to the Voodoo that came out in 2015 in very few numbers, but then really mainstream in 2016 model years. The Voodoo engine is so cool, okay? And I know everybody who's into Mustangs or listening to this video right now, how much we all love and appreciate a Voodoo engine. Yes, I know they eat themselves to death. Yes, I know they have some pretty significant reliability issues. I think they're probably overblown in most cases, but make no lies about it, it's definitely an issue with some pretty, I would call, still severe issues. Just oil consumption, and then the Voodoo's grenading themselves. So even with all that, every single Mustang person has a very soft spot in their heart for the Voodoo engine, just because they're so cool. How it has that Ferrari flat plane crank architecture. Now, it's not exactly Ferrari architecture because the firing order isn't the exact same, but still such a cool sounding V8 for that car. Now, here's a hot take for you guys. The Voodoo engine, I think, practically, meaningfully, isn't really all that great. Yes, it's cool that it revs high. Yes, it's cool that it has a flat plane crank to it. But to be honest, what does it really do? Who really cares in terms of actual like race application and power output? Because Coyotes will pretty reliably rev to Voodoo engine levels, and they're just far more reliable. Like, unfortunately, the Coyote is just such a more reliable engine than the Voodoo. But the Voodoo is still such a cool car. But the GT350 is still such a cool car. Both the main GT350 and the GT350R. So I think that is like probably like the pinnacle Mustang for the generation. Now, I know it's certainly significantly down on power output. 526 horsepower. like it's a lot, but like not really, you know what I mean? Like as soon as you like throw it up to boosted applications, it's not really, right? You're not going to go take an NA GT350 that's been untouched and start winning roll races on the highway. Um, you know, there's, you know, if you have a GT350, you're going to get smoked by a 10 or 80 Gen 3 Coyote car all day long. They're just faster. Really being that the 10 or 80 is just such a quick transmission compared to any 6-speed manual, whether it's the Tremec in the GT350s or the MT82s in the Mustang GTs. But still, such a cool Mustang. Like it's probably my favorite Mustang. And if someone asks me, what do you think the best Shelby Mustang it would be to own? It would for sure be a twin turbo GT350R. I just don't think there's anything cooler than that. You get your manual transmission, you get the brilliance of the Voodoo, and then 2 turbos is like even better, because 2 turbos, I think most people, if you have the reliability straightened out, probably better than a supercharger. But anyways, that would be my dream car, is a Shelby GT350R with 2 turbos. And hey, honestly guys, maybe one day we have that on the channel. That's the goal, really. And I'd love to show you guys that build, but that's certainly far off. So the last car with, so I guess in the last few cars that came out with the S550 Mustangs were the Mach 1 and the GT500. So with the Mach 1, I think that's probably one of the best Mustangs to buy for the money. I wouldn't call it the coolest or the vibiest, not by any means, but the Mach 1 Mustang I think is by far and away the best bang for a buck Mustang that you can buy. You have a lot of GT500 and GT350 parts within the suspension, within the brakes, even with, you have the GT350 manifold on the Generation 3 Coyote. But you have a car that's very, very close to a GT350. Definitely lacking some vibes, I get that, but mechanically it's very close. But you have such superior reliability to that thing. I think that is like probably the best car you can buy in terms of a Mustang to throw boost at, because you have the extreme reliability of the Generation 3 Coyote. Right, you have the robustness of the Tremec TR3160 transmission. Now I know you can get with a 10 or 80 car, and here, I've always owned manual Mustangs. I know people don't really buy manual Mustangs anymore. Every time I see somebody on a Facebook page with a new Mustang, it's always a 10 or 80 car. So I get it, they're faster. But here, we're gonna speak more on the manual side of things, even though we still appreciate a 10 or 80, but we respect an MT82 more. So the Mach 1, really, really cool car. Definitely has some heritage to it with, you know, just being a Mach 1 badging. It has all the reliability and robustness and the best parts of all the Mustangs in terms of how stout they are, putting into one car. And also too, they just look really, really good. I think that the Mach 1 front ends, the stripings, the rear lower valence, it's just a really, really handsome, well put together car. So then there's the GT500. And I probably kind of spoiled it with my preference for manual transmissions, but I think, I know I probably sound too old school here, but I think the automatic transmission, the untunable 8-speed dual clutch Tremec that's in the GT500s, I wish they should have given us an option for a Tremec TR6060. I think that was such a huge mistake. It's such a cool car, and the Predator engine is such a good engine. They're by far and away the strongest for Coyote architectures. They're the one engine that can probably go do 1,200 horsepower to the wheel pretty reliably, although the Tremec gets pretty sketchy at that point. But it's such an impressively stout engine. But I feel like it's been soured by not being able to get it in a manual transmission option. So to me, that's pretty unfortunate, and I think that is the one failing, maybe I shouldn't say failing, but the one fallback of the S550 generation that kind of hurts it in terms of why I would consider it a peak Mustang generation. But because of all the other brilliance and all the other models and all the other engines within the line for the S550 were just so good, and I think so superior to all the engines that came before it. I think that's still easily the peak Mustang generation. So Yeah, I just think it's so unfortunate that Ford never offered a manual transmission for the GT500. But anyways, guys, that's gonna do it for today's video. I hope you guys appreciate me sitting here on my car ranting to you guys about Mustangs. I could do this all day. Let me know if you guys like this. I know how-to videos are pretty useful for you guys, and anything else, but I appreciate you guys tuning in. Don't feel like you have to comment, like, or subscribe. I want you guys to do that on your own volition. If you guys are here consuming my content, watching my channel, that's more than I can ask for, and I appreciate it. So again, I'll see you guys in the next one. This is already off to a bad start. I'm having a good time. You were back to like something floating in the wind.